I had the privilege of getting a football scholarship to Sanford University in 1990, and it was a bit of a lifelong dream of me to be able to have that opportunity to be able to do that. And going into my fifth year, or actually my fourth year of playing, I was looking forward to being a four-year starter, being a senior, and being a leader on the team. And the Monday before our first game of my last year, I had a shoulder injury, and it wasn't bad enough where it required immediate surgery or me having my season come to an end. But it did require me to be held out of that very first game. And going into the week leading up to the second game, the coaches told me, said, if you can go out there and practice, your shoulder stays in place, which, I mean, it was popping out, and there was a lot of pain involved. He said, you'll get to start. So we go to that second game, we go play a team on the road, and not only do I not start, but I don't get into the game at all. Going into the third week of practice, they tell me, they said, Jamie, if you go out there and you do everything we tell you to, and you can make it through the practices, your shoulder stays in place, you can withstand the pain, you'll start. Third game comes around. Not only do I not start, but I don't get to play. And this goes on for 3 or 4 weeks. And I'm getting into the pits of this. I'm very, very disappointed, having played and started for the previous 3 years. I feel like I've been given a bad hand. And there were some times when I would be so upset at night when I lay down in my bed at the dorm that I would actually have to get up, and I'd go get in my car and I would drive around Homewood, angry, sad, upset, frustrated. And that's where I was when I was walking from class to the cafeteria at Sanford one day. I see a fellow who's still a dear friend of mine. He's a pastor of a church in Atlanta. And he was a student at Beeson Divinity School at the time. And I meet him right when I'm about to go up the stairs to go to the caf. And he asked me, and I'm sure he probably meant it as a rhetorical question, he said, how are you doing? And rather than just saying, I'm fine, I'm doing great, how are you? I let him know how I was doing. I just started give him the unvarnished truth of how frustrated I was and what all was going on. And I'll never forget that he looked at me with this very calm expression, and he said, Jamie, says, I know that you feel like you've been mistreated, that the coaches are not telling you the truth, and you're being manipulated, and those sorts of things. He says, but I want to tell you something. God's word in Proverbs 21:1 says that the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, and he directs it like a water course wherever he pleases. And he says, I know you're not dealing with kings, you're not dealing with governors, you're not dealing with princes or people like that, but you are dealing with authorities. They are authorities that God has put over you. That's not by mistake. And God has their heart in his hand, and he's guiding it like a water course wherever he pleases. I know that's not a very big verse, but what that happened was that one moment there, going to the calf, God's word penetrated my heart in such a way where I did pretty much a 180. It didn't really change my circumstances. It didn't change the fact that my shoulder was hurt, but it did point me upward towards God and what he was doing. And I was thinking, okay, well, if God's in control of this and he's the one who's working through this, there's got to be something he's teaching me or trying to teach other people. So that was my prayer after hearing that verse. Say, okay, God, what would you have me do? So my shoulder actually started to get worse, so much so that I was being held out of some practices. And when I was being held out of those practices, rather than just folding in the back and observing, the coaches had me hold the chains during a 2-minute drill, which is normally reserved for walk-ons or managers. I mean, the lowest of the totem pole on a football team. And here I was a 3-year starter. I was a 5th-year senior. Which if that had happened before this fellow had spoken to me, who knows what I would have done? I probably would have quit. I probably would have gotten my car and driven home, would have been done with it. But I was thinking, okay, God's in control of this. And as I was over there holding those chains, I found out that I was getting to talk to people who are walk-ons, people who are not really that high on the totem pole with a football team. And started to build relationships with them. I started seeing that because of this injury that I had, that my scope of relationships that I had on that team was actually growing. And I was getting to have a bigger influence on the team than I probably normally would have. So continue to seek God's what he was doing in and through that. And then before the last game, we had a team meeting. It was a Friday night before the game, and all the team members were in there. Coach was giving this pregame speech, and finally at the end he says, "Okay, this is going to be the last home game for our seniors. I want all of our seniors to speak and talk about what this means to them." And for some reason, at this particular time, I was kind of in a bit of a pit. And as these seniors were starting to speak and talk about how great their season was, I started, right there in the midst of that meeting, started to get a little bit bitter. And I was leaning back on that adage of my mom, always saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Because I was afraid if I opened up my mouth, I was going to just spew venom. And finally, all the seniors had spoken and said their little piece at this last meeting. And I was just sitting there. And there's this one fellow who I still don't know whether he's a believer or not, was sitting over at the side, African-American fellow, a guy named Carlton Golden from Luverne, Alabama. He said, Jamie Peterson has not yet spoken, and I want to hear what he has to say. So he really put me on the spot there, and I basically got to share with him. So listen, I said, this has not been the greatest season for any of us. I think we ended up with a losing record that year. I said, I know I've been having a hard time with the shoulder injury, haven't been able to contribute the way that I wanted to. But I love you guys, and I'm here to serve you in whatever way I can. So I started to see, even as I was there having this bitter heart, I was starting to articulate the fact that I don't belong to myself, but I belong to God as a tool, as an instrument for His purposes. Well, the interesting thing about that was the game the next day, I was, had the, pregame festivities where, our last home game, got to go out and meet your parents at the 50-yard line. And walked off the field, and I was crying like a little baby, thinking about, this is going to be the last home game that we have, play the game. And I'm walking off of the field, heading up to the locker room, and this fella comes down from the stands. And he's a fella who went to a lot of road games, went to all the home games, and he was a big Sanford fan. I think there were only probably like a half dozen of people like this guy in the whole world. And he comes down out of the stands and he grabs me by the shoulder and he says, "Hey," he says, "I want to say something to you." He says, "I'm a friend with some of the coaches on the staff, and tell you a little bit about me. I've been without a job for the past 2 years, and things have gotten so hard that I've felt like leaving my wife and my kids. And through my relationships with the coaches, they've actually been telling me about you and your attitude through this hardship in your life. And because of your witness to this team, what the coaches have seen, what they've told me, I felt like I can stay with my wife and my kids." And that hit me like a ton of bricks. So I go into the locker room, and everything just kind of coalesces. There as I'm sitting there on the bench, I start to cry. Not just a weeping, but that kind of the cry like you got when you got a spanking when you were little, where you couldn't quite catch your breath. And it hit me all of a sudden that, again, that I do belong to God. I don't belong to myself, but I belong to Him, and He has His hand on me for His purposes. And as I look back on that, even though it was one of the more difficult times of my life, I would say that it was one of the most joyful, in a sense that I knew His presence in a very real way. And the fact that my shoulder was not healed, I still had to have it operated on. It still sits a little bit lower over on this side than it does over on my left. It still hurts. But you're reminded that I don't have to have it all together for God to use me. I don't have to have all my I's dotted and all my T's crossed, that He uses me just as I am, and regardless of what brokenness I may be experiencing. And as I trace all that back, just to the simple words that were spoken to me by a friend, a sharing of God's Word, that changed me, and it reminded me of the fact that it's not through the big grandiose things that we have an impact for Christ in this world, but it's through simple faithfulness, speaking a word in love and in grace to a friend in a time of need, and being used of God the way He wants us to be used.